interview of Mr. Henry Kelly, 10 January 2000, 69th Regiment Armory, New York City. Interviewer is Lieutenant Colonel Robert von Hassel. Videographer is Mr. Michael Aiken. Mr. Kelly, tell me about where you were born and grew up.
Well, excuse me, I was born in Brooklyn, New York, on Knickerbocker Avenue to be exact, and I lived in Brooklyn and Ridgewood, Queens for just all my life. Went to school in Queens and whatnot, Grover Cleveland High School. I graduated. And after I graduated from high school, I got a job, very fortunately, in a company called Sperry Gyroscope. And I can remember, this was my first major interview for a position, and I remember this very distinctly. The young lady said to me, you know, you have the job, etc., but she said, now, your starting salary will be $85 a month. Now, this is 1941. And I did a fast 4 into 8 and come up with 2, and I was still 17, and I thought, my goodness, I'm 17 years old and I'm making $20 a week. Now that may sound a little ludicrous today, but then I was a very happy guy. $20 a week. So anyway, I worked at Sperry for 15 months, and then I went after my parents to let me go into the Navy. And finally, they acquiesced, and I guess it was in the middle of July of 1942, I went down to be, I enlisted, and I was rejected because of my eyes. So I went to the doctor, and he told me that you're just wearing the glasses too much. He said, just wear them when you work and take them off. Okay, so I did that for 2 months, and I went back and I re-enlisted, and I was accepted. But the day I was accepted, I had 3 eye examinations. So I was really borderline to get into the Navy at that time, because I knew eventually I was going to have to go. And with all due respect, sir, I preferred the Navy to the Army. And because I met a friend of mine who I went to high school with, and he was in, and he told me, he said, the one thing about the Navy, he said, you'll always have a roof over your head, a place to sleep, and 3 squares a day. And I said, that sounds better. You know? And anyway, I went in October. I finally got taken in October. And then, well, I just split my naval career. I really don't know. It was nothing extraordinary. I went to boot camp in Newport. I was caught up in the big naval construction for destroyer escorts, and I got out of boot camp in 4 weeks, and then I went over to gunnery school in Newport, Rhode Island. Was there for about 4 months, came out, and then, well, I'm summing this all up, and then I got put on a destroyer escort. We commissioned the USS Carlson, DE-9, up in what was then the Charlestown Navy Yard in Boston. It is now a beautiful marina and condos right down by the water. And then, as I said, we went to Bermuda for our shakedown, and then we went out to the South Pacific. I spent about a year out there. We came back to the States for a month, went back out again for about another 3 months, 4 months, and then I got transferred to go to advanced gunnery school in San Diego, which I did, and then I got finished with my training in San Diego, and I always remember this because I went on a transport, and we went into Lady Gulf, and this was about June, I guess, of 45 by this time, and right in the middle of the 7th Fleet, you know, and here I am, I got destroyers, I got a couple of old battleships, I got heavy cruisers, all staring me in the face, and they picked my name, Kelly, USS LST 399. I said, oh. But I spent the last 6 months I was in on an LST. And it was rather interesting, I must say. But basically, that's my experiences, my career, if you will. I'll tell you truthfully, I came very close to shipping over when we were out in the islands, because this was 1943, and there was an expression out there, the Golden Gate in 48. And figured, what the heck, I'm going to spend that much time, I might as well ship over and be USN and make it a career. And so this friend of mine I was with, very, very friendly with, he said, look, Kel, you can always do it. He said, why don't you wait and see? So, as it was, I got out.
So by shipping over, you meant enlisting in the regular
A regular Navy, and I go the whole route. If I did that, I would have gone 20 years.
And the expression Golden Gate in 48 meant that the war would go on.
Till 48, that's right, exactly. That was the expression.
Do you have any regrets now that you didn't ship over?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that when I got out of the Navy, I was a second-class petty officer. I'm reasonably confident that had I stayed, I would have made at least chief, possibly even a warrant officer. And 20 years, you can't beat the pension, you can't beat everything that you get with it. You know what I mean? My first wife, unfortunately, passed away, but when I got out, I was very disillusioned. I went looking for work, and it was difficult and so on. And I had 90 days at that time to go back at my old rate. And I talked to her about it. She said, you want to go, that's fine. She said, but I simply do not want to be a Navy wife. And I said, well, that takes care of that. The only change was during the Korean War, I was in the reserves, and I used to get a bulletin, and every month they listed the ratings that they were calling up for activation. And and one of them was gunner's mates. And I told my wife then, I said, if I get called, I got to put 2 years. She said, I go to route. She says, because then I got over 3, plus 2 was 5. I'm not going to throw 5 years of my life away, if you will. I'm going to go the whole route. I'll go the other 15, and that's it.
Now, what happened to you after the war? I mean, tell me about when you came back.
Oh, well, I was very upset. I was very disillusioned because I worked for Sperry. Now, I know this sounds pompous, but I enlisted, okay? And I say this with all due respect to anyone who was drafted. Don't misunderstand me. But when I left, since I was not of draft age, I did not get a military leave of absence. I got a straight termination of employment. Now, all the other men who were with Sperry were given a military leave, so that when they came back, their job was secure, their seniority was intact, and everything that went with it. Yours truly just got a termination. So I was very upset over that. So when I came out of the Navy, which I think was another thing that sort of made me think in terms of shipping over, if you will, you see. Nevertheless, I got some letters from them after I got out. You want to come back? We don't guarantee you this and that. And I said, so I said, the heck with this. So then I worked for a foreign freight forwarder. I went to college for a couple of years at nights under the GI Bill. I worked in construction. Basically, what I made the great mistake was when I got out of the Navy, I was in a hurry, and I was chasing the quick buck. You can't do that. And one day I woke up and I looked around and again, I don't want to sound melodramatic or anything, but I was 35 years old. I had no job. I had a wife and 4 children. And I said to myself, Kelly, forget the quick buck. It's passed you by. You got to start from scratch. And that's what I did. Fortunately, it worked out pretty well. Unfortunately, the bad part of it was the fact that my wife died 16 years ago, my first wife. That hurt, but I say we had 37 good years together.
So when you started over at 35, what did you do?
Actually, I went to work for Metropolitan Life, and I worked for Metropolitan Life almost 10 years. And then again, I don't want to get into all of these things, but there was a pay change, and I didn't like it. I had a big argument with the manager, and when I got home, I told my wife, I said, I got to go. She said to me, you had your big mouth open again, and I said, yes, I can't help it. It's the way I am. And so I then went to work on Wall Street. I worked for a couple of brokerage firms, and I was very happy I did that because I really enjoyed working there. So at the time that, right after my wife died, I was 61. And I have one son and 3 daughters. And my 3 daughters especially were saying, come on, Pop, what do you got to go to the city for? I lived in Queens, but what do you got to ride the trains for? It's just you can retire. And of course, the more they talked, the nicer it sounded. I'll be frank with you. And then what was the kicker was a man that I worked with became partners in another little brokerage firm. And he told me, he said, Kel, anytime you want to come work for me, you can work part-time. He said, that's fine. So knowing I had that, I decided to pack it in, and from the SIAC I worked for, I went to work for this guy at a little brokerage firm, worked there a couple of years, and then in the stock market crash of 1987, he got wiped out. And I was out of work. So I had incurred a few bills and some obligations. I felt that I had to work. So I went to work for a savings bank. I worked 10 years for a savings bank, and well, a few years ago I was 75, and I said, that's it. So for the last 2 years I've been collecting 2 small pensions and Social Security. And that's it.
Let's go back.
Sure.
Go over a couple of things. What were you doing at Sperry Gyroscope? What was your job?
I worked in the section called perpetual inventory, as I recall. And in the beginning, of course, I was just a nondescript clerk, if you will. But then after a few months, and not because I was so good, but now the war started and guys were getting drafted, so openings came. And I became what was known as a coverer. That was the title. And what we did was we literally built a job on paper. We had specifications, etc., from the engineers, and we would build equipment. My last job that I did before I went into the Navy was I built 36-inch searchlights for the Navy. And I was told that it was a job that you had to be there at least 5 years in the past before you would be considered to do something like that. Well, I mean, as I said, I know I wasn't that good. You say it's just that I was in the right place at the right time, if you will. And so I did the job. I felt I did the job adequately, but I had the itch. And so I don't think I would have gotten any kind of a military deferment, if I had stayed. The job was certainly not that important that I couldn't be replaced, you see. But the thing was, and again I say this with all due respect, sir, I wanted the Navy. That was
Which
it.
plant were you working in?
I worked at Ridgewood Savings Bank. I worked there for 10 years, and then I retired. They,
So, at Sperry, which plant?
oh, the plant, my apologies, I misunderstood your plant. I worked in the original Sperry building down on Flatbush Avenue Extension. That was the original Sperry building. And then they built a small two-story building directly across the street. And we were transferred from 10th floor, I think, 9th floor. They transferred us across the street. And that's where I worked, and that's where I left from, if you will. That was when I it was called when I went into the Navy.
Did you ever have anything to do with the Sperry bomb site?
Oh, no, no, no. See, that, how can I explain that to you? I didn't personally, okay? But some of the men who were, perhaps had a higher security clearance than I at the time, maybe they did. I'll be frank, I don't know. Excuse me, what we did that I know, remember of, like I said, I built the searchlights. Other men built, they were called gyro horizons and directional gyros, which were for the aircraft. And one of the men I worked with was in a plant. He was an expediter. And I got talking to him one day, and he said, well, you want to come over? I'll show you what it looks like. And so he took me into the plant where these were all assembled, and they were on testing boards, and they would go up and down, much like the plane you see, and so on. And I remember the naval inspector came over, and he said, what's this? And he told him, well, I'm just showing him. And he said, we're not taking pictures, get the hell out of here. So, okay. And I was thrown out of the, which was true. I mean, I really had no business being there, you know what I mean? But it was, now what they did, and if there was, I know there was the Northern bomb site, I don't know about the Sperry, but I know that there was some stuff that I did not have access to. That much I do know.
And this plant was down on Flatbush Avenue?
Flatbush Avenue Extension, right. Right at the foot of the Manhattan Bridge is the original Sperry building, and that's where I worked.
Did you see a lot of changes there because it was now wartime? You know, increased plant. Was there a particular like wartime atmosphere to working there?
Oh yeah, much different, much different. I mean, when I started, this was still peacetime. 6 months later, it was wartime. Now, as an example, we only worked 35 hours a week. I was doing clerical work, obviously. We worked 35 hours a week. 2 or 3 weeks, and we used to get paid twice a month. And 2 or 3 weeks after, we went automatically went on a 6-day week after Pearl Harbor. We were working 6 days a week, and we were getting paid every week. Just come on and pay us in cash. And there was a lot more security. More men were hired, and it was, as they said, it was a lot more difficult to go around. Much of the what little I experienced prior to the war, but there was sort of a, well, I wouldn't call it a country atmosphere, but a somewhat cavalier attitude towards work and towards the job. But December 7th, it changed everything. I mean, there was no fooling around. You were there to do a day's work, etc. And we did. I mean, we turned out a lot of stuff.
Did they have any special programs or briefings because of the war?
Not that I remember, no. I know we got some bulletins, you know, papers, but I not offhand, I don't recall.
Was there a big change in the makeup of the workforce?
Oh, yeah.
Women?
Right. Right. And then, see, at that time, Sperry had, of course, the original Sperry building. Then they had plants in Brooklyn. They had, oh, goodness gracious, they had the GAR 5 building, the GAR 6 building. Oh, it had another building there on Franklin Avenue somewhere near Myrtle. And at the same time, they were constructing what ultimately became the main plant out in the Lakeville section of Long Island. And not long after the war ended, they shut everything down there, and everything went out to Lakeville. See, and that's where, had I accepted their offer, and it wasn't really, it was just an interview, I would have had to travel there. And of course, I didn't have a car at the time, so would have been a little difficult to get back and forth.
Was it a little difficult getting used to women workers?
No, I always enjoyed the presence of the female gender, you know what I mean? But no, seriously, I had no problem with it. Maybe some others did, but frankly, I didn't.
Did they seem to have any problems, the women workers, with the work?
Not to my knowledge, you know. In fact, I can tell you this. Friday nights, there was a place on Bridge Street near Fulton. That's just downtown Brooklyn. It was called Silsby's. This was a little bar, a restaurant, you know. You went in there on Friday night. You knew that there was nobody objected to women working, because there was guys and girls in there, and, you know, they had money up on the bar just like the guys did. So it was, I guess it was accepted very, very easily, by most anyway. But yeah, no, it never bothered me, frankly. No.
Do you remember any special defense preparations in Brooklyn at the time? Air defense artillery, anti-aircraft artillery?
No. The only thing I do remember is that after Pearl, we had a couple of blackouts in New York City where we, you know, practiced in case of something. That much I remember. But as far as anything else, it's not offhand.
Do you remember the big air raid scare in December of 1941?
Oh, sure.
Tell me about that.
Well, let's see. I jumped ahead. The one that I remember mostly was December 8th, when we came into work, and there was reports on radio, and they had to come over the PA system that supposedly it was rumored that the Japanese had landed troops off San Francisco, and there was an invasion out there. Now, of course, it was all just rumor, totally unfounded. But as far as air raid in New York City, gee, I don't recall. I'll be frank with you. I don't remember. I do remember very distinctly telling us to stop work for a few moments, and we listened to President Roosevelt's speech, his famous Day of Infamy.
Mm-hmm.
That we heard. We stopped work.
What were you thinking when you heard that?
The bastards. Pardon the expression. You know, really, that was my thought, you know, and I personally, and this is my own personal opinion, of course, but when it came to the dropping of the atomic bomb, President Truman made that decision. I personally had no objections because, not only what happened at Pearl, but the tenacity of the Japanese soldier in places like Saipan and Okinawa, and prior to that, of course, in Eniwetok, places like that. These people were not going to quit easy. And they got to make a push on Japan. It was going to be a lot of American lives. Forget the Japanese. I'm thinking the Americans. Maybe a lot of guys are going to lose their life. And I felt that if this could shorten it, by all means do it. So I personally, I never had any qualms, any misgivings about what the president did. I think he did the right thing.
Let's go back to Brooklyn for a moment.
Sure.
Before we jump ahead. Any other things you remember about changes in your daily life or the life of the community now that the war started?
Well, I remember seeing for the first time the little flags in the window with the star. That I remember. I remember, and I felt very bad because there was a young man that the fellas I hung around with, we knew who had joined the Navy, and he was on the Coral Sea. And he, in the Battle of the Coral Sea, on the Lexington, when he was killed. And he was the first person, if you will, that I knew personally that had lost his life. And I guess it kind of angered me, and I dare say a lot of other people. And by something of an amusing bit, talking about December 7th, in Ridgewood on Woodbine Street, between St. Nicholas Avenue and Myrtle, there was a Japanese restaurant that made, there was no sushi bit, you know, but it was a Japanese restaurant, and they made some of the best triple-decker sandwiches. You want to, they were really great. So that afternoon, after Pearl broke, and I was with these friends of mine, and they said, "Hey, that Jap restaurant's open." We walked down there, it was black. We never saw those people again. That's for sure. And then around the corner, there was a small, I guess you call it a cabaret. Oh, goodness gracious. They had, inside the place, they had murals of the Bavarian Alps, you see, and some of the people used to wear the short leather pants. And I guess 2-3 days after Hitler declared war on us, the name was changed to the Groveland Gardens. And I can't think of the name of it was before that anymore. But those are about the biggest things that I remember, you know, changes.
What about rationing or air raid wardens, civil defense? Well,
I never went into that. Some people on the block, we lived, because I lived on the street, I lived on Putnam Avenue, it was all 6-family houses. So there were a few men who went into that. I personally, I didn't. The rationing really didn't start until after I went in the Navy, because I went in, let's say, in September or October 1942. The rationing really hadn't come full swing yet. But I can tell you an amusing bit about that rationing. I was gone about a year and a half. I came home on a short leave, and my mother took me around the corner to the butcher, and she says to the butcher, you know, she said, "You got a steak for this guy?" And there was a lot of people in the place. I thought the poor man was going to have a heart attack. I mean, don't ask, you know, of course, naturally, your mother, my son, you know, I mean, the Admiral is home, he's got to have a steak, but the poor guy behind the counter, I see him, said to my mother, went outside, I said, "Mom, what are you trying to do to the poor guy?" And she didn't have any rations, damn sure, she was put the arm on him for steak for me. Of course, they always, sure. He had it in the refrigerator, you know, not out in the counter, of course, but inside in the refrigerator. I had a steak that night for dinner. Yeah.
Let's jump ahead to
Sure.
your time on the USS Carlson.
Sure.
That's a low number DE.
Yeah, the E9.
And you helped put her in commission.
Yes.
So you were a plank owner.
Yes.
A lot of problems shaking down that ship?
No. We were very fortunate because being one of the first to be commissioned, we had about I would say roughly 20 men who had been to sea before, chiefs, first class, second class, men who knew the ropes. We had 10 officers. 7 of them were ensigns out of 90-day school. We had a lieutenant commander was the captain. We had a full lieutenant was the exec, and we had Lieutenant J.G., who was the chief engineer. So we had a corps of men who were very experienced, who knew what they were doing, especially the chiefs. And again, I think you'll agree that it's the sergeants, it's the chiefs, the guys that whip these outfits into shape. And our chiefs were the guys that did it. Not so much, I'm getting myself in trouble here, not so much the officers, but really it was those are the guys that do it. You know what I mean? They really whip everybody into shape. And we had a lot of drills. See, one of the things, and I assume it's the same in the Army, but I know aboard ship, one of the things that we did was we had drills. 2 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock at night, things of that sort. And of course, at the time, it was, oh, not another one, you know. But you realize that what they were doing was they were teaching us to react. Not to think, but to react. And that's, my son, who was in the Navy during the Vietnam War, he experienced something on board his destroyer, and he was telling me about it, and I said, remember when we talked and you were complaining about all the drills? I said, what did you do then, Jim? He said, I react. It's the whole idea. You don't think, you react.
What kind of different drills would you go through?
Abandoned ship drills, fire drills, of course, general quarters, you know, one drill after another. Man overboard, that sort of thing. You know?
Now, the destroyer escorts were a new class of ships.
Yes.
Did they tell you why they created these ships?
Well, we were told that they're going to be strictly anti-submarine. That's and our armament proved that, because we only had 3-inch 50 guns was our main armament. Now, a submarine, it's as a deck gun, but that's a 5-inch gun. So if we ever found one that was on the surface, the only way you could get close enough to him is you had to start going with your machine guns and try to, you know, your anti-aircraft weaponry to keep him off the deck, because you let him get at you with that 5-inch gun, you're in trouble. You know, he's the guy's going to outgun you. Even though he's only got 1 and you got 3, but it doesn't make any difference. You know, if you can't get close enough to him, you got a problem. See? So that was the whole idea. That's what we were told.
How seaworthy was the destroyer escort?
Oh, they were very seaworthy, but you got your brains knocked out of them. I mean, it was a joke, you know. The submariners got 50% sea pay. We got 10% sea pay. But we used to say, why don't we get 25%, because we spend half the time underwater. Okay? If I just, an amusing thing to me was, we were out in the islands, I guess, maybe 2 months at best. And I was going on watch from 8 in the morning till 12. And I know we had had some heavy weather the night before, because we felt that down below. But nevertheless, we used to wear a belt, a life belt, you see. And then we also had the K-Park that you put on over with the, you know, with the shoulders. So I had my belt on, and I went upstairs and I opened the hatch to step out on deck, and we had gone into a trough, you see. And I looked up, well, of course, it looked to me like it was 40 feet high. You know, probably no more than 20, but that wall of water looked 20 feet high. And I uttered an expletive, turned around, went down below, got my K-Park, and this very good friend of mine, Kirby, said to me, "What's the matter, Kel?" He says, "I'm wearing both." "Well, you go topside." And I went up and I was on deck with the two of them, and it was rough. Thank God the rain had stopped, but it was tough.
What about living conditions? It was very
Very
small ship.
Small, yeah. We, see, at the one I was on, which is always very funny to me, we did not have a mess hall, okay? We had folding tables, such as you would have on a picnic, okay? And we had a bench, folding benches, with the legs, you know, and the rod to hold them together. So usually it didn't make any difference where you sat. You sat on the bench or you sat on the foot lockers because, you know, the bunks had to be put up against the bulkhead. So, but when it got rough, then everyone wanted to sit on the foot lockers. Nobody wanted to sit on that bench because if one guy lost his balance, everybody went. Food, plates, you know, the whole bit. And invariably, when it would happen, somebody would yell out, "Roll over, you SOB, roll over." And it was true, because you know, you got your brains knocked out. You never slept on your side. You slept on your back or you slept on your stomach, one or the other. You sleep on your side, you're going to wind up on the deck. You're going out. You just have to learn to sleep like this, or flat on your stomach, one or the other.
So where was your general quarters station?
Originally, I was on the depth charges. That was my, not only did I stand watch, but that was my general quarters station. Then, well, I'm ahead of myself. First, I was on the 20 millimeters. Then I was transferred back to the depth charges. And then the gunnery officer wanted to switch everyone around, and I was the gun captain on the number 2 3-inch. And then we used to take sightings, you know, and we would mock drills and try, sometimes we had gunnery drills. We have, a ship would be, you know, towing a sled, and we used to fire at that thing manually. You had to learn that when if you were rolling, that when you were coming down, that's when you got to fire, because if you're going this way, you're going to go way up in the air, you know, so you got to learn to say, commence firing, fire 1, you know, and then that was it when you were coming down. So, otherwise, that thing would wind up in the air someplace.
January 2001. We're talking about life on DEs. What were you, standing watch, what is that in?
Well, you were standing watch. I mean, we were on 3 sections, and somebody, 1/3 of the crew had to be on watch. This was, of course, wartime. And then 2/3 were off, and then you went 4 hours on and 4 hours off. And they used to call what they call dog to watch, so you weren't stuck with the same tour all the time. And now, when I was on the depth charges, I was not required to be a lookout, because if I saw anything, it was too late. You know, I'm this far off the water. So if I saw anything, forget it. You know what I mean? If I tell you some one amusing thing, the depth charges on the destroyer Escort, we had 4 port, 4 starboard, and then we had, with the K guns, they call them, or Y guns, and then we had the rack, with the depth charges on the rack. So we used to have drills, you see, that we had to set the depth charges. Well, of course, everybody's fine during the day. You see, you can look, you can see. But at night, you can't put the light on, you see. So we had to learn to count clicks. Now, the way that was set up, we had the 3 sections, and we had competitions. In other words, the gunnery officer would say, who's the best setting? And this fellow, Tommy Moran, I used to stand watch with, we used to win every time. We beat them, and there's no baloney. And they couldn't understand how we were able to beat them. And my gunnery officer came down, he stood there, and one day, and he had a stopwatch, And then when we got finished with the drill, he went over and he looked to see if all the depth charges were set the way they were supposed to be. And nobody could understand why Moran and I. And it was really very simple, because on the port side of the ship, where the depth charges were, you had one at port starboard. Well, the device, the trigger device, faced this way, if you will. I'm left-handed, so I was on the port side. So all I had to do was go click, run, click, where the guy who was right-handed had to come around and stand, you see, and turn each one. So we used to beat them 4 or 5 seconds every time. And my friend Kirby, who stood depth charge watch too, he said, "I can't understand." I said, "Mac, we're good. What can I tell you, you know?" And my gunnery officer couldn't understand, nobody could understand why we were able to beat these guys. And nobody took into account the fact, it was very simple. It was all obvious, you know, but nobody picked it up. So I'm left-handed. And I was able to just reach in and click like that. And I used to break chops over that all the time. "You guys, you can't beat us. Moran and I are too good," you know, stuff like that.
So after you shipped down in the Caribbean,
No, well, yeah, we went to Bermuda.
and then from there to the Panama Canal?
Right?
What was it like crossing through the Panama Canal?
Oh, it's fantastic. It's hard to explain. It's just that when you go through with the, and I marvel at how they could put a wagon or an aircraft carrier through that thing. I mean, there must have been that much room on either side of the locks. It was, I tell you, the nicest day. Well, you're bringing back memories. The nicest day, the nicest 24 hours I ever spent was when we crossed the equator.
Tell us about it.
The equator. The night before, excuse me, the night before we went across, we ostensibly had Davy Jones piped on board. We had to go to quarters, and the man was a chief carpenter's mate. And he made himself a cutlass, and he had a bandana, his pants were cut, you know, so on. And he came around and he inspected us. The bosun piped him on board. And then the next day, we had the, you know, the initiation, and one of the officers had to put on the asbestos suit, and they tied 2 Coke bottles together and put them up in the bow of the ship. Said, "Tell us when we hit the line." And the poor guy's up there sweating like a bugger. Another officer used to be a great one for doing the gunnery drills. And we had what they call a loading machine. And they had him up there loading that machine. They had to do this, you know, it's all part of it. Of course, I got my hair cut. Here I'd been in the Navy maybe 18 months. My hair was just growing back nice. And then I get it cut off again. They had the slop chute where they saved the garbage for about 3 days, filled it up with salt water and all the coffee grounds, and goodness knows, then you had to crawl through this on your hands and knees with your rump sticking up, and you got whacked. What they did was they took pieces of canvas, about so big, okay, and they stuffed them with rags, tied them up on both ends, and then dropped them over the side, let them soak in the salt water, and then take them up and hang them in the sun. They were like clubs. I mean, you know, and that hurt. You got whacked on a rump. But it was all part of it. I mean, it was to me, it was one of the best days I spent. I was in the Navy. It was just a wonderful experience. I should say one other thing. We flew to Jolly Roger from the yard.
And that's when you became a shellback.
Exactly. And I got the certificate. We were very fortunate. A lot of guys didn't get what we got, but our captain did it right. I have a certificate. In fact, I gave it to my grandson. It's about this wide, about that high. All in that script, you know, you hear, ye, etc. And I had a frame, and my grandson has it in his bedroom. I'm very proud of that. I like that. So it was really good. It was a great day.
Now, what were your duties, what were the ship's duties, ship's mission in the Pacific?
Well, we just did convoy duty. I mean, that's all. It wasn't until after I got off, after I was transferred, that she saw a lot more combat after I got off, because the Navy was smart, you know. They got me out of harm's way, saying, well, I wouldn't do any harm. But seriously, what we did was convoy duty. At one point, I had a quartermaster tell us, we were standing around talking one night, and he said that at one point when we were out there, in 42 days, we had slightly less than 36 hours in port. That's 6 weeks. And less than a day and a half that we were in port. All we do, go in, take on fuel, stores, out. And that was it.
And the rest of the time you were escorting convoys?
Yeah, one convoy after another. Yeah.
Generally, what port of calls did you make?
Well, we used to, our main, you would say, where we operated from was Noumea, New Caledonia, Espiritu Santos, and the New Hebrides. Those were the two major. We brought stuff over to New Guinea. We brought especially LSTs and cargo ships up to Guadalcanal and to the Russell Islands. And then a few days after the push on Bougainville, we were part of a convoy that went up there with reinforcements, and one of the LSTs got hit by some Japanese shore batteries going in, and we were right there, and the captain requested permission to go in there, and the commandant of the convoy said, no, get out of there, because we had 3-inch 50s. He sent a destroyer over there with 5-inch 38s pounding in on the beach, you know. What was our 350s going to do? You know what I mean? So they fired, I don't know, goodness gracious, they must have fired 75 to 100 rounds in on the beach into the jungle. And then they took off, and we just resumed our station while the LSTs went in and were unloading on the beach, because they went, naturally, they went in at high tide.
Were any of your convoys ever engaged by Japanese submarines?
We chased a few. We had one tanker hit. And this is what we always talked about. We made a mistake, because the first convoy we handled, we came from, which is now a big resort. It was called Bora Bora. And it was another DE, the Levy, and ourselves. We took them from 3 tankers. We took them from Bora Bora to Espiritu Santos. The Levy and 2 tankers went in. And we were told to go to a little place a few miles down the road, as it was, a place called Ifadi. It lies between Espiritu Santos and Noumea. I remember this very distinctly. It was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We were passing between 2 islands. The water was like it'd be in your bathtub. And all of a sudden, the lookout yells out an expletive. There goes a torpedo weight. It was going right for the tanker. But apparently, we can only assume that this must have been the last torpedo that the Japanese captain had, because you would never fire 1 at a tanker. You know what I mean? You got to get them, so you're going to throw 2. But he fired that from so far away that the tanker had a chance to swing this way to starboard, and they got it right in the forward cruise quarters. We could see the crew on the tanker running along the catwalk, running aft. And like I said, that word react, we stood there mesmerized watching this. And as soon as it hit, we all ran to our battle stations before the gong went off. We guys were heading for their battle station.
And at that point, did you go after the sub?
Oh, we chased them for about 4 hours. We made 4 runs on them, They gave us a probable, but we never had sufficient debris to warrant giving us a kill. Then we caught up to later on, we caught up to the tanker, and we were helping to escort her back to Esperito. Of course, she was underway, you know, watertight doors were holding. And then we got close enough, and we were told, get back there. And we went back on what they call a hunt and kill, and we steamed all around that area and never came up with anything. And then the next day, a scout plane came over and gave us the word, the signal, with the lights to go to Noumea. We went to Noumea, and our captain had to go to a hearing, because how, you know, one ship, how can you have one ship hit? Where's your sound gear? You know, so on. And there was just no explanation for it, because our best sound man was on watch at the time. He said he got nothing, didn't get a peep, nothing. So from that time on, we did penance. We did penance. That I can tell you.
How so?
From all of, we used to come in, we found the DE-7, the DE-8, the DE-10 would be in Noumea, would be in Esperito. We'd come in, pick up, and out we go. You know, say, what is this, you know? But then we realized. And then if I may just one step further on this, the DE-7, the 8, went to Sydney, Australia on R&R. They got 5 or 6 days, whatever it was. So we knew this. We came back, we come into Esperito, and there was a tender there called the Dixie. They tied us up alongside the Dixie, and we figured, you know, we're going to Australia now, you know, it's our turn. Some of the guys went over and bought new shoes from the tender. We were cleaning up our blues, etc. And they put a big box of machinery down on our fantail. And they told us, no, that was on Saturday. On Sunday, I always remember this, we steamed down to Ifari, where we were going with that tanker. We went in, there was a tender there. We tied up alongside the tender, and they hoisted that big box of machinery off our fantail. And then the captain said, you know, he passed the word on the PA system, set the CDT details were getting underway, and there was a big cheer went up, because we're heading for Australia. We went about 100 yards away from that tender. We dropped the hook, and the captain got on the PA system, and he said, we got 5 days of R&R here in the Ifari. There'll be no ship's work other than sweep down, you know, things of that sort. Have 2 Liberty parties a day, get a couple of cans of beer, go over and swim. I said, oh, we're doing our penance. And that's the truth. Every one of those DEs we were with, the 7, the 8, the 10, the 11, the 12, they all got down to Australia, but not the 9. Not the 9.
So what were you thinking when you're engaging a Japanese submarine, you know, running back and forth for dropping the depth charges? Were you ever concerned that the sub might turn and attack you?
Frankly, no. Frankly, no. It never occurred to me, because, in the first place, you're attacking, so you're not thinking. I mean, you just want to get this SOB. That's number one. Number two, destroyer escorts, which was one of the reasons they were so bounced around so much, is we had a very low draft. We only took, I don't know, was it 8 feet, 9 feet of water. Now, it's very hard to set a torpedo because of that fact, is that it can most of the time go underneath. It's very hard to set them up there where they wouldn't be accurate enough, or even if they could fire with that kind of a setting. I mean, again, that's World War II. Today, well, that's altogether different.
Did you ever keep up with any of your crewmates from...
Yes. This friend of mine, Kirby, we started in boots together. goes to Kelly Kirby. And he lived in Providence, Rhode Island. And Christmas of 42, I was up there. He invited me to his house for Christmas dinner. I was able to get liberty that day and go there. And we were just friends. I met his fiancée, and we were very close friends, and all the way through. And if I just make more with the story, when it came time to send someone back to San Diego, it was between Kirby and I to go to gunnery school. And the gunnery officer said, I can't promise, he said, but there's a possibility that we can fly you back to the States, because we were in Eniwetok at the time. He said, you get home for Christmas. So I said to Mac, look, Mac, I said, you can, ordinarily I'd say you go, because I know you're going to get married, you and Gloria. I said, it wouldn't bother me, you go. I said, but I got a chance to go home for Christmas. He said, I understand. So we tossed the coin. I won the coin toss. And I came home, and it was while I was home on that 30-day leave that I ultimately met my wife. When I got out after the war, I went up to see him in Providence. We spent a couple of days with him because he got out before I did. And in fact, he came down for my wedding from Providence. And we kept in touch for a while, but then it died. And some years ago, after my wife died, I took a little nostalgia trip and I went up to Providence and I tried to get in touch with him, and he had died a few years before. I spoke to his son.
You ever go to any reunions?
It's strange that you should ask that. As a man out in St. Louis, well, I should backtrack. There's an organization, it's called Destroyer Escort Sailors Association. And I met a man, and anyway, he got me to join, which I did. And I get the paper. And I keep looking. They have reunions for all the ships. And I think to myself, I don't even see people from the DE9 joining this. I thought, my goodness, was I on a phantom ship? Doesn't anybody remember this thing? Yeah, you know what I mean. And as it was, no, one man in St. Louis, a couple of years ago, tried to organize a reunion for the guys from the DE9, and I guess it just never materialized. Because I answered, I said, yes, I would go, and I wrote to him, and I never heard another thing. Now, we're not kids, so goodness gracious, something may have happened to the guy. Maybe the guy passed on before anything materialized. I have no way of knowing.
Well, let's go back to the Pacific for a moment. You were transferred off of the DE to a LST.
Right.
Mm-hmm. There was a requirement for gunner's mate for the LST?
Yeah, well, what happened there, sir, was that the Navy had what was called an advanced gunnery school in San Diego. And as I said, I won the coin toss, so I was second-class gunner's mate. So I went back. I had my 30-day leave, and then I went down to San Diego. After we finished school, there was guys were sent to the East Coast for new construction up in Bremerton and whatnot. And yours truly was accused by a bosun mate of saying something impolite. I told him it wasn't me. Somebody back over here. He didn't believe me. He said, you'll pay for that, you wise, blah, blah, blah. So a few days later, our grades came out, and I finished, we had 52 guys in the class, I finished number 26. And guys before me got new construction, guys behind me got new construction. Yours truly got the replacement center up in California. And when he saw us looking at the board, he came over and he said, "See, wise guy, you know what you said?" I said, "I told you I didn't say it then, and I'm telling you now." So he said, "I fixed your..." And it was one of the guys was standing behind me, he said, "Kelly didn't say it, it was me. I said it." And he looked at me and I said, "You know, now I use the expletive." And he said, "Okay," and he left. Because I think I'd have strangled that son of a gun. I was so upset over it. But that's how I got the LST, because I went up to replacement depot, and I could put on a transport with a bunch of other guys, and we sailed out to Lady, and then with all that, as I said before, all that good stuff around, LST 399. What can I do? But it was good. It was good duty. I can't complain. I enjoyed it. I didn't like it then, but...
Were you involved in the landings at Luzon, Leyte?
My ship was. This was all after I came on board. See, I didn't get on board until June of '45, so the war ended in a couple of months. What happened was, I came on board in the morning, that very afternoon, we set sail and we went to Guadalcanal. And we went from the canal, we went up on the beach, we picked up some GIs, we went from the canal over to the Russell Islands, and we picked up a few more guys. We stayed in there, and then we were heading, our orders were to go to Saipan. And we were en route to Saipan when we got the word that it ended. So we were diverted to Eniwetok. And we stayed there, oh goodness gracious, must have been close to a month. And then we were sent to Okinawa. And while we were in Okinawa, then we went over to East Shima, and we started unloading troops and Army Air Force personnel and equipment and so on, and saw them digging big holes and taking the airplanes and throwing them in there and setting them on fire, because they were obsolete. The jets were coming, you know. So when we got back to Okinawa one time, my gunnery officer knew one of the officers on another LST. And I said to him, "Do me a favor." I said, "See if you can get me a transfer." I said, "Temporary." I said, "I'd love to go to Japan." Because they were heading up to Japan for occupation duty. And they couldn't because they weren't coming back to Okinawa. So I had to stay. So I missed Australia, I missed Japan, but I think I hit 85% of the other islands in between.
You know, it must have been something for a young man from New York City to get out and see all that.
It was wonderful. It was wonderful. It really was. Again, you're a kid. I didn't really understand the import of it at that time. But, of course, as time went on, I realized that, like, for example, Bora Bora was a nothing. That island today, it's a very big resort. The Fiji Islands was nothing. And today, again, it's a lot of it's a big resort. Qantas and whatnot fly down there all the time. You know, so it shows you how times have changed.
Now, after the war, you were in the reserves?
I joined the inactive reserves because the company I worked for told me in no uncertain terms would they give me time off. And my wife said, "I want to have a little vacation, even if we just go to the beach. You're going to be away for 2 weeks." So I went into the inactive reserves. The only reason I went in was I wanted to protect my rate. I wanted to protect my rate. That something happened, I want to go back as a gunner's mate. I want to go back into the Navy. That was it. That's
How
what I
long were
did.
you in the inactive reserve?
Well, let's see. I got out when I was 23, almost 23. I was I joined, I was about 25. And then, so that would make it, say, 48. So I was about 28, thereabouts, 29, when the Korean War started, 1950, okay? because I was born in 23, well, I'm making about 27, okay, 28. So that's why when I started seeing this business about the guys being called up, I said to my wife, if I go, then, because if I go in now, I said, I got to put at least 2 years, I'm going to be 30, 31 years old by the time I get out. So what am I going to do then? So, if I had been called, I would have stayed. I would have gone to war. I really would have.
When you look back on it now, what stands out the most when you think of World War II in your experiences?
Well, I think the one of the things, is this feeling of camaraderie with my shipmates. I can't speak for the Army, but I know, especially when you're on a small ship, this essentially, you don't maybe think of it, but this is your family. And as in any family, two members of the family can argue, but don't let somebody else come in and talk about it. That's a no-no. It's the same thing on board. I mean, I can remember being out in Esperito. They had a little recreation island there. And there was a couple of guys from destroyers that were there. And they were talking about how close, we were waiting for the boats to come pick us up. And they were talking about how close they went to bombard places like Rabaul, Kavieng. And one word led to another. And they started having a fight over who was closer. Did one guy go in 3,500 yards, 4,000 yards, 2,000 yards? You're full of bull, you never went in that close, etc. The next thing you know, some guy said, hey, now wait a minute, boom, now what do you got? Now you got 3 guys, 4 guys, 5 guys. Because somebody in that family was getting knocked around. And of course the SPs had to come and, all that other jazz. But this is it, you developed this. This thing I will always remember.
Where does the camaraderie come from? I mean, you get all these guys from different places.
I don't know. I'm not a psychologist. I couldn't tell you. All I know is, all I can tell you is this. When we went aboard ship, the first couple, we were told, especially when you got yard workers around, do not leave any personal belongings out. We had our foot lockers. Everybody had a locker. You put your wristwatch away, your rings, your money, whatever, was in there. I would say within 2 months, maybe even less, I couldn't put a time on it. Within 2 months, you could go take a shower and leave everything on your bunker. Nobody would touch your thing. That to me is your camaraderie. You can trust the man sleeping above you, beyond you, next door, whatever, over there. That we did. And don't let anybody, like I said, we could say this bucket of bolts, there's no good SOB, but don't let somebody else say that. Because that's your family. I can call it's no good, but don't you. And that I think is the biggest thing that I experienced more than anything else, the camaraderie.
When you look back at your service, those years out of your life, was it worth it?
Oh yeah, yes. I have no qualms about that. And plus the fact that from, again, my perspective, and I say this with all due respect to anyone else, I did what I wanted to do. I wasn't drafted. I didn't go into the Army. I wasn't drafted into the Army or to the Navy or to the Marines or anything else. I volunteered to go in. So if I have any qualms, I got nobody to blame but myself, which I don't have.
Are you proud of what you did?
I wish I could have done more. I mean, again, I'm not a hero, don't misunderstand me. But I wish I could have done more. but it wasn't to be. I mean, we did what we did, and that was it. I wish I could have had more combat. I wish I could have been able to do more, but unfortunately, I couldn't. I didn't.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to add?
My profound thanks for asking me to come in and to do a little yakking. I'm very happy about that. I really mean that. And again, I'm sorry that I missed yesterday and went to the wrong armory today.
We're glad you made it.
I'm glad I made it, it's right. I'm very happy. I'm very happy.